The calendar notification appeared on my screen at 10:23 a.m. on a Wednesday in late October. It was a vague invite for a career development conversation, but I knew exactly what it meant. The new female CEO scheduled my termination for 4 p.m. sharp. At 3:47, the lobby badge printer whirred. 3 visitor badges. Unannounced. Federal inspectors. The woman in the suit locked eyes with me and asked, "Are you Sadie Barrett?" Everyone turned to me. The room froze. I simply stared back. Let's back up to that morning. I stared at the screen for 45 seconds before the meaning settled into my bones like ice water. In my 13 years working at Catalyst Enterprises, I had watched this exact sequence play out 7 times. The vague meeting title, the closed-door location, the sudden HR presence. It was the corporate equivalent of seeing a grave dug in your front yard. I wasn't surprised, though. I was the person nobody thought about until the walls started crumbling. My official title is Senior Regulatory Compliance Officer, a job that makes people's eyes glaze over at networking events. I verify that pharmaceutical shipments meet federal safety standards and track temperature logs for controlled substances. It is tedious, unglamorous work that never comes with a corner office or a company car. But it is the only thing keeping a distributor from losing their license when someone with a badge asks questions. I knew my meticulous nature was a liability to the new management. Panic is what happens when you are caught by surprise. But this had been building for months. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee, minimized the calendar notification, and went back to work. At 3:47 p.m., I saved my final document and backed it up to my personal cloud storage. I had already packed the photos from my cubicle wall. I wasn't psychic, but I understood patterns. When you have been around long enough, you learn to read the weather before the storm breaks. The walk from my desk to the executive conference room took 90 seconds. It was long enough to notice that the usual office chatter had dropped to whispers. Colleagues suddenly became very interested in their computer screens as I passed. I felt the weight of being the person everyone knew was about to become a cautionary tale. I was halfway down the corridor when I heard that mundane mechanical sound. The badge printer cycled once, paused, then cycled twice more in rapid succession. 3 people in suits stood at the security desk. The woman wore a lanyard with a federal seal I recognized immediately as the Office of Inspector General. They were showing credentials and moving past the checkpoint with a stride that didn't wait for permission. My pulse kicked up, not with fear, but with sharp recognition. Instead of heading toward the conference room where I was to be fired, I turned toward the lobby. I wasn't going to my funeral. I was going to war. I closed the distance to the security desk before anyone from the executive suit could react. The lead agent, a woman with steel, gray hair and eyes that had seen every excuse in the book, watched me approach with calculated interest. She didn't smile or offer a pleasantry. "Sadie Barrett," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. "Yes, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline hammering in my chest. She extended a hand. "Special Agent Lydia Mercer. We need to talk immediately." Mercer didn't waste time with small talk. "These are investigators Donovan and Wallace. We are here to conduct an unscheduled compliance inspection regarding your company's quarterly filings." My stomach dropped and soared simultaneously. This was it. The moment I had dreaded and prayed for. "Understood," I said. "What do you need from me?" Mercer's gaze drilled into mine. "Everything. Documentation, correspondence, audit trails, and your honest assessment of whether the reports submitted to federal agencies match reality." Behind me, rapid footsteps clicked sharply against the tile floor. Scarlett Pierce, the HR director, appeared at the edge of the lobby with a flush rising on her neck. She looked like someone trying to put a lid on a boiling pot with her bare hands. "Excuse me," she said, stepping between me and the agents. "Can I help you? We were not notified of any inspection today." Her voice carried a tremor that she tried desperately to mask with professional outrage. Agent Mercer turned to Scarlett with an expression that could freeze gasoline. "Federal inspections under Title 21 do not require advanced notification," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We are here under statutory authority to examine compliance records. Your cooperation is mandatory, not optional." Scarlett's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. She looked at me, then back at Mercer, realizing her standard corporate bullying tactics were useless against a federal badge. Scarlett pivoted to damage control. "I need to notify the CEO. In the meantime, please come to the executive boardroom. We can make you comfortable there." It was a trap. The boardroom was bugged and controlled. Mercer didn't budge. "We will be speaking with Miss Barrett first," Mercer said. "I assume there is a private space available that isn't the boardroom." She looked at me for the answer, bypassing Scarlett entirely. The power dynamic shifted instantly. "Conference room 3, I said, pointing down the hall. "It is quiet and secure." It was also directly next to the room where I was scheduled to be terminated in less than 10 minutes. Scarlett paled. She knew exactly what was happening in that wing of the building. "Lead the way," Mercer said. As I walked past Scarlett, I saw her pull out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. The warning was going out. We entered the small, windowless room. The air was stale, but it felt like a sanctuary. Mercer took the head of the table while her team unpacked heavy laptops. "Miss Barrett," Mercer started, "you seem unsurprised by our arrival." I checked my watch. It was 3:58 p.m. "I am not," I admitted. "But before we start, you need to know something. In 2 minutes, I am scheduled to be fired for trying to prevent the violations you are here to investigate." Mercer didn't blink at my confession. She glanced at her watch. Then at Donovan. "Retaliation," she nodded, typing furiously. "We will deal with your employment status shortly," Mercer said. "Right now, I need you to verify a specific filing." She reached into her briefcase, the heavy leather creaking in the silence. She pulled out a thick folder and slid a single document across the cheap laminate table. It was our Q3 controlled substance report. "Familiar?" she asked. I looked down at the paper. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. The headers were crisp, the dates aligned perfectly, and the compliance checkboxes were all ticked with authoritative precision. On the surface, it represented a facility running at peak efficiency with 0 deviations. It claimed we had maintained temperature stability for 3 months straight. I knew for a fact that Freezer B had failed twice in August alone. The lie was printed on high-gloss stock. Mercer tapped the bottom of the page with a manicured fingernail. "Look at the certification line, Miss Barrett." I followed her finger. There, in sharp black ink, was a signature. "Sadie Barrett." It looped and dipped exactly like my handwriting. It had the slight slant I have used since high school. It was eerie, like looking at a photograph of myself I didn't remember taking. "That is your name," Mercer said. "And that appears to be your signature." I stared at the ink for a long moment. It was a high-quality forgery, likely traced from my expense reports or internal memos. But they had missed one subtle detail. I looked up at Mercer, meeting her intense gaze. "That looks like my signature," I said quietly. "But I didn't sign this." The air in the room grew instantly heavier. Donovan stopped typing. Wallace leaned forward. "Be very careful," Mercer warned. "You are claiming this is a forgery." "I am not just claiming it," I said. "I can prove it." I pointed to the date next to the signature, the 30th of September. On that date, I sent a formal refusal to sign this report via email to the CEO. I explicitly stated the data was corrupted. I tapped the paper for emphasis. Also, I use a specific blue gel pen for all official certifications. This is standard black ballpoint. I haven't owned a black pen in years. Mercer pulled the document back, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the crime scene on the table. If you didn't sign this, she said slowly, then someone else did. And if they submitted it to the DEA, knowing the data was false, we aren't looking at compliance violations anymore. She looked at Donovan. We are looking at wire fraud and identity theft. The stakes in the room shifted from civil to criminal. I can give you the real data, I said, my voice steady. I have the original logs. I have the refusal emails. I have the threats from HR when I wouldn't play ball. Mercer nodded, clicking her pen. We are recording this now. You are officially a cooperating witness. Just then, the door handle rattled violently. It was locked. A muffled, angry voice came through the wood. Open this door immediately. It was Alara Vance, the CEO. Mercer ignored the angry muffled shouting from the hallway. She nodded at me, a silent command to proceed immediately. I pulled my laptop from my bag, the brushed metal case cool against my sweating palms. This machine was company property, but the encrypted external drive I plugged into the side was mine. I hope you like organized chaos, I said, waiting for the decryption prompt to appear. I typed in a 30-character password. The screen flickered to life. This is my insurance policy, I said, turning the screen toward the agents so they could see the directory. The files were arranged by month, then by violation type. Folders labeled, ignored warnings, falsified logs, and retaliation threats glowed in the harsh fluorescent light. Mercer leaned in, her glasses reflecting the damning list. I started archiving everything in July. I explained, right after Alara took over and the safety protocols started disappearing. It was a map of decay. I clicked on the folder named Operations Override. A chain of urgent emails filled the display. Here, I pointed to a message from the operations manager. On the 12th of August, 3 temperature alarms went off in the biologics freezer. I highlighted the response from management. The subject line read, "Keep momentum moving." They manually overrode the alarms, I said. They claimed the sensors were faulty to avoid a quarantine halt. That product went out to hospitals the next morning. Donovan let out a low whistle from the corner. They ship compromised biologics, he asked, typing faster now. Knowingly, I corrected. And here is the inventory list. I opened a spreadsheet tracking the specific batch numbers involved. These units were likely ineffective by the time they reached patients. Mercer's expression hardened into something terrifying. She wasn't looking at a compliance failure anymore. She was looking at potential manslaughter. The air in the small room grew suffocatingly tight. I navigated to the September folder to deliver the final blow. This is the smoking gun regarding the signature, I said. I pulled up an email sent to Alara Vance and Scarlett Pierce. The timestamp was the 30th of September, 4:15 p.m. The body text was bold and unequivocal. I cannot and will not certify the Q3 data as presented. I sent this 15 minutes before the filing deadline. I told them. I refused. They filed it anyway. I scrolled down to the reply from HR. Scarlett's response was chillingly polite on the screen. Sadie, we need team players who understand the bigger picture. Inflexibility will be noted in your review. That was the warning shot, I said. Today's firing was the execution. Mercer read the email twice. She looked at the forged document on the table, then back at the screen. The timeline was irrefutable. The company hadn't just cut corners. They had built a trap. Mercer sat back, her eyes wide with a mix of respect and disbelief. Miss Barrett, you haven't just provided a witness statement, she said softly. You have effectively conducted the entire investigation for us. We have enough here for a warrant right now, Before I could answer, the lock on the conference room door disengaged with a sharp metallic click. The handle turned slowly, a master key. The executioner was done waiting in the hall. The door swung open, hitting the wall stopper with a jarring thud that vibrated through the floor. Elara Vance stood in the threshold, framed by the hallway light, like an avenging angel in a tailored power suit. A waft of expensive sandalwood perfume cut through the stale air of the conference room, masking the smell of nervous sweat. She didn't look at me. Her eyes locked instantly on the agents. Behind her, Scarlett hovered, looking pale and terrified. "This is unacceptable," Elara announced, her voice icy and controlled. "You are sequestering an employee during a scheduled termination meeting." She stepped fully into the room, her heels clicking against the tile with aggressive precision. "I demand to know why federal agents are interfering with internal HR matters," Elara continued, crossing her arms over her chest. Miss Barrett was scheduled to be relieved of her duties at 4 p.m. for performance issues. "You are trespassing on a private corporate action." Agent Mercer didn't flinch at the intrusion. She slowly closed the file folder containing the forged signature, shielding the evidence from Elara's view. The silence stretched thin and tight, like a rubber band about to snap. Mercer stood up, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She didn't shout, but her voice carried the heavy, crushing weight of the entire United States government. "Miss Vance," Mercer said, moving around the table to place herself physically between Elara and me. "You are currently interrupting a federal investigation under Title 21. By entering this room after being denied access, you have just attempted to intimidate a cooperating witness." Mercer's hand rested near her badge. Elara blinked, her polished veneer cracking just enough to show the confusion underneath. "Witness?" Elara scoffed, though the word sounded breathless and weak. "She is a disgruntled employee." Mercer leaned forward, encroaching on Elara's personal space with deliberate menace. "She is a federally protected whistleblower as of 10 minutes ago." Mercer corrected sharply. "Any attempt to terminate her employment, alter her status, or restrict her access to this building will be considered obstruction of justice." Mercer let the words hang there. "Obstruction is a felony, Miss Vance. If you fire her today, I will personally escort you out in handcuffs before the sun sets." The color drained from Elara's face, leaving her makeup looking like a mask on a corpse. Her eyes darted over Mercer's shoulder to find me sitting in the corner. For the first time in 4 months, she wasn't looking at a nuisance or a statistic. She was looking at the person holding the detonator to her career. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I just sat there with my hands on my laptop, the digital evidence of her crimes humming quietly on the hard drive. She realized she had lost. "I suggest you return to your office," Mercer commanded, her tone dismissing the CEO like a wayward intern. "Cancel your evening plans, Miss Vance. Investigator Donovan will be up shortly to collect your devices and begin your formal interview." Elara opened her mouth to argue, but the fight had left her. She looked at Scarlett, who was already backing away down the hall, desperate to distance herself from the blast radius. Elara realized she was standing alone on a sinking ship with no life raft. Elara straightened her jacket with trembling hands, a futile attempt to regain dignity. She turned on her heel, the movement lacking its usual sharp authority. She walked out of the room without another word, her footsteps sounding heavy and uneven in the corridor. Mercer walked to the door and closed it firmly, engaging the deadbolt once more. She turned back to me, a small, grim smile playing on her lips. "Well," she said, picking up her pen, "I believe you just survived your firing. Now, let's finish burying them." The next 48 hours blurred into a montage of controlled chaos. Federal SUVs multiplied in the parking lot like invasive beetles, blocking the reserved executive spaces. Inside, the hushed whispers exploded into frantic movement as agents commandeered the third floor. I watched from my desk as IT technicians were escorted away from their terminals, their faces pale and sweating. The silence of the warehouse was broken by the sound of inventory being seized. My calendar invite for termination had vanished. The building wasn't just being audited, it was being dissected alive. The first head rolled before lunch on Thursday. Security escorted Eric Sutton, the operations manager, out through the main lobby. He wasn't holding a box of personal effects. He was holding his wrists together in front of the staff he had bullied. 2 hours later, a company-wide email landed with a heavy thud. The board of directors had convened an emergency session. Elara Vance was placed on immediate administrative leave pending review. The Queen was dead, dethroned by the very paper trail she had ignored. The mood shifted from fear to awe. Friday morning brought a summons, but this one felt different. Austin Webb, the chief financial officer, requested my presence. Unlike Elara, Austin had always been a ghost, signing checks and avoiding conflict. I walked to the C-suite, passing empty offices that felt like haunted houses. Austin looked like he hadn't slept since the badge printer whirred on Wednesday. His tie was loose, his eyes rimmed with red exhaustion. He didn't sit behind his massive oak desk to intimidate me. He stood by the window, staring at the federal agents below. He looked small. "Thank you for coming, Sadie," he said, turning to face me. His voice lacked its usual smooth, boardroom polish. "I assume you know the board is scrambling to save the license." I didn't offer him comfort. "I assumed the board was scrambling to stay out of prison," I replied. He flinched. "Both," he admitted, rubbing his face. "We knew, Sadie. When Elara pushed for speed metrics, we knew safety would slip. I saw your emails. We were just too afraid of her revenue projections to stop it." "Afraid of revenue projections," I repeated, letting the absurdity hang. "I was afraid of killing patients." Austin looked down at his shoes, unable to hold my gaze. "It snowballed," he whispered. "First it was one sensor, then a whole shipment. Elara promised it was temporary until we hit Q4 targets. It was the classic corporate eulogy. We compromised integrity for a bonus." He gestured to the empty chair. "We need to fix this. The OIG says our only hope for leniency is radical remediation. The board wants to appoint you vice president of regulatory affairs," he said, sliding a contract across the desk. "Immediate effective date. A significant salary increase, stock options, and full benefits. We need someone the feds trust to lead the cleanup." It was a bribe wrapped in a promotion. They wanted to buy my credibility to shield themselves from further fallout. I looked at the salary figure. It was triple what I made now. It was also not enough to buy my silence or my compliance. I didn't pick up the pen. I pushed the folder back. "No," I said simply. Austin blinked, stunned. "Sadie, this is everything you wanted. It's the authority to do the job right." I shook my head. "It is a title," I corrected. "I don't need a title. I need weapons." I leaned forward, resting my hands on his desk. "If I take this job, I am not answering to you or the board regarding safety. The standard offer isn't going to work. I have conditions." Austin looked desperate. "Name them," he said. "First," I listed, counting on my fingers. "I want absolute hiring and firing authority for the compliance department. I am gutting the current team and bringing in professionals who know how to read a statute. Second, I want unilateral veto power over all operational decisions. If I say a shipment holds, it holds. No override from finance, no pressure from sales. If I red tag a batch, it stays in the warehouse until I release it. Period." Austin swallowed hard but nodded. "Done. What else?" "Third," I said, my voice hardening. "I want a formal, written apology from the board of directors. Not just for the company files, but read into the minutes of the next shareholder meeting. Austin paled. Sadie, legal will never. I cut him off. Legal isn't in charge anymore. Austin, the DOJ is. You want me to save this sinking ship. You admit that you drilled the holes. I waited. The silence stretched, heavy with the ghosts of ignored emails and forged signatures. Okay, he whispered. You will get your apology. I pulled the contract back, crossed out the reporting structure, and wrote independent authority in the margins. I signed it with my own blue gel pen. I'll start immediately, I said, standing up. My first act is a mandatory stop, ship on all inventory. Austin looked like he was going to vomit. All of it? He asked weakly. Every box, I confirmed. Until I inspect it personally. I walked out of his office, leaving the door wide open. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was the law. The warehouse went silent for the first time in a decade. My stop. Ship order froze $4 million of inventory on the loading dock, creating a physical wall of cardboard and shrink wrap. I walked the floor with a clipboard, not as a ghost, but as the executioner of bad habits. I fired 3 shift supervisors before coffee on Monday. They tried to argue about efficiency metrics and throughput targets, quoting Ilara's old playbooks. I pointed to the door without hesitation. I wasn't interested in speed anymore. I was interested in survival. The culture shock was violent, immediate, and absolutely necessary. To rebuild. I poached the scariest compliance officers I knew from competitors. I hired people who were famous for being headaches. The ones who memorized CFR Title 21 for fun. My new team didn't care about making friends in the break room. They cared about audit trails and temperature excursions. We turned the conference room into a war room, covering the glass walls with sticky notes of corrective actions. The sales team hated us. They whispered in the hallways about the bottleneck, but they stopped whispering when I walked by. They knew I held the keys to the kingdom now. The forensic audit revealed rot deeper than I had imagined. We found temperature logs faked with random number generators and training certifications signed by employees who had been dead for 6 months. It was nauseating. Every drawer we opened released another cloud of corporate malpractice. I worked 14-hour days, subsisting on vending machine coffee and sheer adrenaline. Austin Webb avoided my office, terrified I would find something that implicated him directly. I didn't care about his feelings. I was building a fortress of documentation, so strong that no federal wind could ever blow it down again. 3 months into the reconstruction, my desk phone rang. The caller ID displayed a blocked government number. I knew immediately who it was. Miss Barrett. Agent Mercer's voice was crisp, cutting through the hum of my office, HVAC. I wanted to give you a heads up before the press release drops. I stopped typing, my heart hammering a familiar rhythm against my ribs. The Department of Justice is moving forward, she said. We are unsealing the indictments this afternoon. The wait was over. The other shoe was finally dropping, and it was going to land hard. Mercer listed the charges with the detachment of a surgeon reading a chart. Ilara Vance and Scarlett Pierce are being charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of justice. The words hung heavy in the air. They are looking at significant prison time, Sadie. Federal sentencing guidelines for this level of fraud are not forgiving. I closed my eyes, picturing Ilara's corner office, now empty and stripped of her awards. She had traded her freedom for a quarterly bonus she would never spend. It wasn't a tragedy, it was a transaction she had lost. And the company? I asked, bracing for the impact. Catalyst Enterprises will pay a civil penalty of $2.3 million. Mercer replied. You will be under enhanced monitoring for 5 years. She paused, letting the silence stretch. But you keep the license. The department decided against criminal charges for the entity. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. Why? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Because of you, Mercer said simply. Your cooperation and your remediation efforts proved the intent to fix the problem. You saved them. I hung up the phone and looked out at the warehouse floor. The forklifts were moving again, but slower this time, obeying the speed limits. We had survived, but the cost was etched into the faces of everyone left. Austin appeared in my doorway minutes later, looking like he had seen a ghost. I saw the news, he said, clutching his tablet. Alara surrendered to the FBI an hour ago. He looked at me with a mix of fear and gratitude. He knew he was lucky to be standing there, not sitting in a cell. That evening, as the cleaning crew vacuumed the hallway, my personal cell buzzed. It was a number I had deleted but recognized instantly. It was Scarlett. Sadie, I know you probably hate me. I'm scared. I need a character reference for the plea deal. Please. You know I was just following orders. I stared at the glowing screen. I remembered the way she had looked at me in the lobby. Ready to feed me to the wolves to save herself. She wanted absolution from the victim she had tried to bury. I didn't type a response. I didn't feel anger, just a cold, final resolve. I pressed delete and blocked the number. Some choices are irreversible, and she had made hers the day she threatened my career for being honest. A moment later, a notification popped up on my laptop. The company's official press release went live. It detailed the fraud, the fine, and the new direction. The final sentence caught my eye. We remain operational thanks to the integrity and leadership of our new vice president, Sadie Barrett. The world finally knew the truth. 6 months later, I stood backstage at the Hyatt Regency in Chicago, smoothing the fabric of a navy suit I actually liked. The hum of 200 voices filtered through the heavy velvet curtains. A sound like distant surf. My name was projected on a screen 20 feet high. Sadie Barrett, VP of Regulatory Affairs. Just half a year ago, my name had been on a termination notice in a deleted calendar invite. Now, I was the keynote speaker. My hands weren't shaking, but my stomach felt tight. I was still learning to exist outside the shadows. The moderator called my name, and the applause was polite but reserved. I walked to the podium, gripping the wooden edges until my knuckles turned white. I looked out at the sea of faces in the dim ballroom. These were compliance officers, quality managers, and safety inspectors. They were the people who got ignored in meetings and bullied in emails. They looked tired. They expected a lecture on CFR codes or audit strategies. I decided to throw away my prepared notes. They didn't need regulations, they needed a war story. 6 months ago, I was scheduled to be fired at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. I started, my voice echoing slightly. The room went dead silent. My crime was sending an email that said no when leadership said yes. I told them about the momentum moving emails. I told them about the pressure to sign false logs and the way HR weaponized the word flexible. I saw heads nodding in the darkness. They knew the code words. I was speaking their secret language out loud for the first time. I kept receipts, I said, leaning into the microphone. I archived every threat and every override. I told them about the badge printer wearing and the look on Alara's face when the lock clicked. Compliance isn't about paperwork, I said, my voice rising. It is about patient safety. It is about being the only thing standing between a profit margin and a body count. I paused, letting the weight of it land. If you are the obstacle, stay the obstacle. Be the wall that doesn't move. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, a woman in the back row stood up. Then a man in the front. Suddenly, the entire ballroom was on its feet. The sound was deafening. A rolling thunder of applause that felt like a collective exhale. It wasn't just for me. It was for every time they had been silenced or overruled. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I wasn't an invisible bureaucrat anymore. I was proof that the system could actually work if you fought for it. As the applause washed over me, I scanned the back of the room near the exit doors. A figure stood in the shadows, leaning against the wall with arms crossed. It was Agent Mercer. She wasn't clapping, but she offered me a sharp, distinct nod. It was better than a medal. I nodded back, then gathered my papers. I walked off the stage and into the bright lights of the hallway. The obituary I had read 6 months ago was gone. This was the beginning.